How much do you know about the United Nations Association? Did you know that there was one in Washington, D.C.? Stay tuned for more on CaribNation about the Washington, D.C. chapter of the United Nations Association. Welcome to CaribNation. I'm Derrice, Deane. We hear a lot about the United Nations and we hear a lot about United Nations organizations around the world, but we don't know a lot about the United Nations Association. There is a United Nations Association of the United States, and there is a United Nations Association National Capital Area. With me today is the Program Director of the DC chapter of the United Nations National Capital Area, David Lynn. Welcome to CaribNation. Thank you so much for joining us. You are the Program Director at the United Nations Association. Tell us a little bit about what the United Nations Association is and what is your position as Program Director? What does that involve?
Well, the United Nations Association of the National Capital Area is who I represent, and we are the largest single division of the United Nations Association of the United States of America, which is the country's largest grassroots foreign policy organization and one of the leading research organizations on the United Nations. And what the National Capital Area Division is well, what the UNA is it's divided up into 175 chapters and divisions across the country, with the National Capital Area Division being the largest with 1,300 members. And the United Nations Association of the USA is a part of a larger body, the World Federation of United Nations Associations, which incorporates United Nations associations from 75 countries, member states of the UN across all over the world. And that is basically what the structure is. The National Capital Area itself is divided up into several different task forces, ranging from peace and security to sustainable development, and these task forces are focused on developing reports, events, or discussion, fostering civic participation in their specific activities, be it in terms of sustainable development or human rights or things of that nature.
Now, in terms of the makeup of the organization, you have, I suppose, a basic structure, a director, or a president, vice president.
Right.
And now, do you have any restriction in terms of where these people are from? Are they, for instance, in the national chapter here in Washington, your structure is made up of people from international organizations, all United Nations organizations, NGOs, or whom?
Nationally, UNA-USA has 20,000 members, and in the National Capital Area we have 1,300, and these can range from high school students to professionals. Our organization is mostly a volunteer basis. There are currently 4 permanent staff in the National Capital Area organizing the National Capital Area Division. We have a board of directors and an advisory council, and all of these people serving on the board are volunteers. And again, our membership ranges in age and profession and interests, and that's exactly the point of the UNA, is to express to the American populace that anyone can be interested in international affairs, and international affairs reaches out to people of all ages, of all academic disciplines, and regardless of what your interests are, then the UNA has a place or a program or is a vehicle for you to voice your concerns or your interests.
Right. Are members charged fees? Do you have a fee-based membership?
It is a fee-based membership. Introductory fee is $25, and then for every year after that is $40 for non-students. Students have a special discount. It's a $10 membership, And all members, all new members, get a complimentary one-year subscription to Foreign Policy magazine.
I see.
And who is one of our partners in the UNA. So.
Now talk about some of the outreach programs that you're involved in, both in the United States and in the rest of the world. And of course our focus is the Caribbean. I'd like to know some of the things that you're doing in the Caribbean, but I'm sure that the nucleus is somewhere here in the United States. Talk about that nucleus and how the branches work.
Well, UNA-USA nationally has brought to the top of their agenda education and international education in public schools all across the country. So right now one of our biggest programs is called Global Classrooms, which is basically bringing international education to DC public schools, and that we're trying to integrate international affairs as a permanent part of DCPS curriculum. And so this is one of our biggest programs at the moment. We're starting to focus on teaching the teachers about international affairs so that they can...
that's important.
Exactly.
Yeah, because,
and so trying to bring about awareness in international affairs in public education is one of our biggest programs right now. But like I said before, our programs cover a wide range. Upcoming also, we have an Iranian New Year event that's being held at American University, and in the past we've had all sorts of other events touching on Latin America. With regards to the Caribbean specifically, one of our past events just a month ago was at the National Cathedral, where we had a representative from the UN, Diane Corliss was her name. She's the chief of the Small Islands Developing States Unit at the United Nations, and she came and spoke with our membership, and she had just attended a Small Island Developing States Summit at Mauritius. I believe that took place last year, and she came and basically gave us a debrief on what they talked about and some topics.
In 2004.
Right.
Yeah. So when you have these seminars, I suppose you then have people keeping track of all of the information, all of the international events to which you want to lend a hand in terms of, let's say you focus on what is happening in the Caribbean for a while. Do you have inroads to CARICOM, the CARICOM body, for instance, and you keep track of some of the issues that they're concerned about and the role that the United Nations will have in helping them achieve some of their goals?
Mostly what the National Capital Area Division focuses on are cultural or academic programs. As far as advocacy goes, UNA-USA has an advocacy department, and in Washington they also have an advocacy office.
I see.
And they direct most of their political / advocacy concerns through that office.
So I see. So you have a total
a separate
branch that deals
handles,
with that.
Right. That handles the more direct links with the actual institutions themselves.
In the United States body that you have, tell me about some of the projects that you've worked on around the United States and some of the feedback that you've been getting from the people that you might have impacted along the way.
As a civic organization, as a membership and volunteer-based organization, the UNA has seen that one of the biggest challenges in front of the UN is public perception, and that the UN isn't just a talk shop, isn't just a place where diplomats talk back and forth and no action is done, isn't just about peacekeeping necessarily, but so much more than that. The UN is about UNHCR, is about helping refugees, helping children, and that is one of the top priorities nationally right now, is rebranding the UN, rebranding the UNA, so that we make the general public aware that the UN is much more than peacekeeping and talking, and that no, peacekeepers won't be flying in and taking over your lives in black helicopters, and to erase these misled stereotypes of the UN and tell them to convey the message that the UN is does so much more than that.
In the education program that you're working on in the public schools in the District of Columbia, can you give me some idea how widespread that is right now in terms of how far you have gone with that? What are some of the specifics that you're implementing?
Global Classrooms is a UNA-USA national program in that it's touched on 17 major cities, including Chicago, New York, LA, and it's soon to come to Atlanta and New Orleans, and several others. In DC specifically, which is one of UNA-NCA, the National Capital Area's largest programs, our main vehicle of promoting international education is through what is called Model United Nations, where students in the high schools basically pretend to represent role play, if you will, role play the roles of delegates in the UN, and they have to study up on what that country's positions are on certain topics. This year our topic is refugees in general, and then as a subset to that, child soldiers. And so their basic concern is to say if they're a representative of Jamaica, they would study on what Jamaica's role is on these issues and then present these in a mock simulation of how the UN
have a debate
right.
and discuss their issues in their programs.
And this serves as a really good way to teach the kids not only about international affairs, but also enhance their public speaking skills, enhance their teamwork skills. Negotiation skills, exactly.
Which is an important thing to do as well.
And their main goal is to formulate resolutions at the end and vote on resolutions and pass resolutions. And hopefully, if there were a winner, it would be that they would pass a resolution that is leaning towards their country's position on the topic.
Now, do you travel to some of these countries in order to educate yourselves on some of the issues so that you can better help pass that on, or do you have a group of people who are assigned to doing that specifically?
I personally haven't been sent abroad yet, but we do have programs that do send people. One of our programs now, Michael Dumlau, the director of Global Classrooms, started a United Nations Association in Ghana, and in order to get that started, he actually paid a visit to Ghana for 2 months and helped set the groundwork for that. And now UNA Ghana is starting to put together a Global Classrooms program in which UNA National Capital Area is sending a person to Ghana, a student or a grad student to Ghana to help promote this program and help organize it.
I see. Now, you said that your office in Washington is fairly small.
Yes.
So what exactly then is the function of this small group in Washington, and how do you interact with the other branches around the world and around the country in terms of your specific role in this area?
Well, like I said, UNA-USA has a branch in Washington, and they deal primarily with legislative issues and political and advocacy issues.
Okay.
The National Capital Area Division primarily concerns itself with just organizing events.
I see.
And programming is probably 70% of our job. And we try to incorporate as wide and as eclectic of a program as possible. You know, like I also said, from small island developing states events to events celebrating the Iranian New Year. So it's just meant to spread cultural awareness and convey to the public that the UN is diverse in itself, and anyone can and everyone should be and can be involved.
I gather also that you are made up of fairly young people. Is that a correct assumption?
Our age range actually varies very much. The UNA-USA has just started a program targeting high school and middle school students called the Student Alliance, and its goal is to develop UNA chapters within schools and universities across the country. And so if you're a youth, if you're a high school student and below, you can get involved in the UNA via the Student Alliance. For college students or even young professionals, UNA has a program called the Young Professionals for International Cooperation, which are basically young professionals, specifically in DC, for our chapter, we call it YPIC, YPIC in DC has young professionals working from the Red Cross to the World Bank. And then they're UNA members as well, and they help us implement programs on their own accord. And then we have the other segment of our membership, which are just retired ambassadors or former foreign service officers, and other just
retirees of international organizations and things like that.
Who are just interested in attending or organizing our events, or just still want to maintain their level of interest.
Connection to the developing world,
exactly.
I suppose. Thank you so much for talking with us, David, and good luck with your segment of the work at the United Nations. Thanks again for joining us. In the next segment coming up, we will talk with Dexter Sumner about more of the work done by the United Nations, and he's in the communications arm of the United Nations Association of Washington. CaribNation will be right back.
This is CaribNation Television, the source for news and information about the Caribbean and the diaspora. Seen locally in the Washington, D.C. area on MHZ Network. Sundays at 3:30 p.m. and Wednesdays at 11:30 a.m. and on the World Wide Web at CaribNationTV.com. CaribNation, the television for one people, one culture, one Caribbean, one nation.
Welcome back to CaribNation. I'm Derrice Deane. We've been talking about the United Nations Association of the United States, and especially the National Capital Area. With me now to continue this discussion about the communication side is Dexter Sumner, who's the Communications Director. Thank you so much for joining us, Dexter. Tell us a little bit about what your job is as Communications Director and how you help to get the message of the United Nations Association out to people.
Well, Derrice, that's exactly what I do. I am part of the outreach initiative of the United Nations National Capital Area Office here in Washington, D.C. And basically, I help promote the events that the UNA, that's short for United Nations Association, I basically help promote those events, gather venues for them, make connections to media outlets to promote our events, and try to get as much public support and get the public out as much as possible to these events.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about some of the events. How big a staff do you have? Do you have people helping you promote some of these things, and how widely spread are you?
Right. As David probably mentioned, we have a cadre of interns at the United Nations Association office here, and we have as much as to a handful of program assistants. We call them program assistants. A handful to many of students. They're mostly students who are working here in the D.C. area and going to school here in D.C. area, and they work with us, and we can pool from them. And basically, the staff that I work with consists of about 4 or 5 people, and we're all working on media relations, getting the word out to the public, and also letting DC representatives know about the activities that we do here, and getting the message to the general populace here in DC.
So then you have a pretty good relationship or connection to the mayor's office and things like that, work with the police, right, and that sort of thing for right, events.
We have connections great with certain representatives, former ambassadors mostly, to the United Nations. Not so much with the mayor, but we're working on that. That's part of my task.
Of course, in the District of Columbia, you can't avoid having to deal with the mayor's office.
No, you can't at all.
Excuse me, when we talk about outreach around the world, you know, our focus is the Caribbean. We've had a number of disasters in the Caribbean recently, as we have had, well, around the world for that matter. We've had the tsunami, we've had volcanoes, hurricanes, floods in Guyana, hurricanes in Grenada, Jamaica, the Cayman Islands. Do you have outlets in these areas, or do you have a regional body, for instance, in the Caribbean? And how do you interact with them? And what are some of the programs that you either have put in place or will be putting in place to address some of these problems that are being faced by these places?
We have our first big office is probably the UNA Jamaica, or United Nations Association Jamaica, and they're like a first base touch towards the Caribbean. Mm-hmm. Now, along with that, we work with the UN, the UN in specific, to promote what they are doing in the Caribbean. Let me give you an example. There's an initiative called the Small Island Nation States Development, which came out of a program action plan in 1994 through Barbados, and they actually call it the Barbados Action Plan.
Right.
And through that, it's a mechanism for the United Nations to set up field offices in the Caribbean, to look at development, to look at economic means, to look at social means, to basically center around people and to improve the standard of living of people in the Caribbean nations, particularly small island nations. And as you mentioned, some of the actions or some of the effects, the weather effects that have happened in the Caribbean, we have been there supporting the work of the UN in those areas. I know that the UN Food Program, the World Food Program, is working right now in Guyana as far as with the floods they had there recently, last January. And that's where a lot of the focus is being concentrated on Guyana, and also with this development of small island nations.
There is some hope then, I'm sure, that this will spread in terms of work that's being done in Grenada. Grenada, for instance, their economy has been devastated, and so they need ongoing help for the next how many years. But this is something that you will maintain a foothold, so to speak, in there.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, the problem is it's ongoing. One of the biggest, you have so many now events that happen in those areas. You have, and even like the September 11th that affected us here, that actually reduced tourism across the board, so that even the island nations have been affected. Tourism has been down because people are afraid to travel. Part of what they call the Mauritius Initiative, part of the Barbados program action, is to get technical security measures in place in airports to make people feel secure in islands, popular islands as Barbados, like St. Kitts, Antigua, islands like Grenada, all the big tourist areas there, because tourism is a major part of revenue for these islands.
Exactly.
So we've got a foothold in those areas, and we're keeping it going.
Now, in terms of your volunteer efforts raising funds, I know you've been working on the tsunami, trying to get help for the tsunami and things like that. Now, you are responsible for coordinating some of these events. Now, do you try then, once you've decided, for instance, in the Washington area, do you then work with chapters across the nation and say, look, we're doing this, can we all come together across the nation and have either simultaneous efforts or individual efforts, so that as a body we can say this is the contribution we're making to tsunami, hurricane, whatever? Or is it that each person just decides on their own what they want to do and go right ahead with that?
Okay. It's a little of both. One of the things we just came from a major conference, the United Nations Association of the United States in New York, and we talked a little bit about that as far as working together on common goals, on common initiatives, and common actions. The tsunami effort that I am directing, it's going to be made known throughout all the UNA chapters in the country, in the United States. And along with that, we're also opening up to the public in general. That's a big strategy for our tsunami campaign, and that is outreach to the public in general and outreach to other agencies. The chapters, I'm sure we're going to get them on board, because the tsunami walk is going to be a big thing. Because the catastrophe was so large, I think everyone would want to climb on board. And that's part of the outreach, is to get all the chapters to work, to coordinate with us on certain events, certain very important event issues.
Right. And I suppose depending on your fund collection, you will then be directing some of that to the Caribbean as well, through either the World Food Program or whatever other organization there is. Before we get too close to the end of the program, give us some contact information where anybody in the Washington area who wants to contact you to find out either more about the United Nations Association, who wants to work with some of their projects or donate. Just give us a name and a number.
Okay, yeah, if you'd like to volunteer or become a member of the United Nations Association, and anyone can, you can call here in the DC area. It would be 202-518-0471. and that's the basic number here to work with us or to volunteer with our group. We also have what they call a UN Information Center here in town, and that gives you a broad idea of all the it's a springboard to all the agencies working around the world, how to get in contact with them, their numbers and website. And let me give you that number. It's 202-454-2105, and they can give you information on what we're doing here and what the UN is doing
in any part of the world.
Any part of the world as well. And also, if you'd like to contact me, the best way to contact me would be my email, which is dextoor@aol.com.
Now, that office, the information office, is located where in Washington?
On Connecticut Avenue. That's located in Northwest Washington, D.C., so it's really easy to get to.
I see, really easy to get to. Now, you are working on doing some other projects. Are you involved with the education project, or are you mainly some of the cultural projects? Right?
I mainly do the cultural projects. However, as David has mentioned, we have the UN in the classrooms, which is getting really big, and it's educating students here in the D.C. area. That's not only D.C. When I say D.C. area, I mean Maryland and Virginia. They're educating those students on who the United Nations is, giving the United Nations a face, and putting a character on the United Nations. So many people, I know that when we're home watching TV and we hear UNICEF, UNDP, other acronyms, no one really knows what they mean, and a lot of us members can't have trouble with keeping track of all of them.
That's true.
So the Global Classroom Project puts a face on the United Nations, and it is done through our United Nations
And a
Association.
similar thing with your professionals, the Young Professionals program.
Yes, Young Professionals, and they're the one that are helping to support the tsunami walk that I'm going to put together for the end of April. We're looking at April 30th.
Okay, so well, we will hear some more about that, and I'm sure we will be in touch and try to keep us abreast of what the United Nations agency is doing, and especially in the Caribbean. But the fact that you are here in Washington, and you're right, many people don't know that you're here and what you are doing. So I think it's good that we can get the word out. Thanks very much for joining us, Dexter, and good luck to you with your project, especially with your relief efforts around the world and the various projects that you will be doing in the Washington area. For more on the work of the United Nations Association, or maybe to join, go to the website, UNA-NCA.org. Until next time, thanks for watching us. I'm Derrice.